One. Mr. Minister, welcome once again to Radio from Hope Center with video attached. Isn't it nice to have you here? Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here, Bill. Thank you.
Looking at the announcement that you gave out the other day regarding seafood buyers and processors licenses, we know there's been a, 7, 8 year moratorium on new licenses, but I need to kind of put it into perspective. There's a license to be a fish buyer, a license to be a fish processor. There's also a license to be a fisher. Are the fishers impacted in any way, shape, or form with this announcement?
Not directly, no, Bill. So the licensing of harvesting comes from the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. When it comes to the provincial responsibilities, we're in charge of all fish buying, all fish processing. So that's where the moratorium was in place on new buyer, new processor licenses since 2018.
Does the fish buyer also double as a fish exporter, perhaps?
There would be situations, yes, where buyers would also be exporters, but there's situations where primary buyers might sell to an exporter or might sell directly to an importer from another country. So there's nuances to the industry for sure.
Now, of course, we're talking about a moratorium that was in place back in 2018. So the last 7 years, nobody new could enter the business, at least as a buyer or a processor in Nova Scotia. And one wonders, why was there a moratorium put in place in the first place?
It's been explained to me that there was a requirement for a policy review at the time. There were concerns of ownership structure and worries about non-Canadian entities taking over some of our really valuable industry. So the decision was made in 2018 to put a pause on new licenses. And that was in place long enough for us to do a comprehensive policy review and spend a lot of time talking to industry, making sure that when we were ready to lift, that industry understood where we were at and what the requirements were going to be moving forward. So it was not easy, but we got here with generally with the support of industry, which is really what my goal was a couple of years ago when I took over the file.
Now, of course, you've lifted the moratorium. Does one expect a flood of applications coming into your office for licensing?
I wouldn't expect a flood, but I do know that over the last 2 years, we've been tracking the companies that have been asking for either a new license or a new species or to be more flexible with the license that they had. And that number is in the 30 to 40 range. And so that won't necessarily mean a brand new business coming into play, but it might just mean a company looking to add a new species to their license, which up until our announcement on Tuesday, they weren't able to do. So, plus on top of that, Bill, we're going to be really, we're going to take a lot of time to scrutinize whatever business plans are presented for these companies that do want to either be new into our space or to diversify. The goal is not to add undue competition to our province, but the goal is to allow companies to be flexible, to have product diversification, to explore new markets. And I do feel that the moratorium over the last 7 years has kind of slowed us down. And I think that right now we are ready to sell to the world, and that of course the tariffs going into China and the worry about tariffs going to the U.S. have really highlighted for us the need to diversify as much as we can away from those two markets because we're pretty heavily reliant on the U.S. and China.
Now, if we go back in time far enough, and before your time, certainly, I'm not pointing a finger at you in any way, shape, or form here. We go back far enough. Much of the concern started with concern over the available fish stocks. And there were controls put on in a variety of different ways, what you can fish, what you can't fish, a limit to how much you can catch, and so on. Now, if we've got more buyers and more processors, are we not putting a strain on the fishery itself?
No, I don't think so. Because when we look at the application process that we're going to have in place when we're ready to accept new applications, there'll be a strong component of that that'll be a business case and a business plan that's going to show where your resources are going to come from. And so if someone puts forward a business plan that says they're going to process 100 metric tons of a species and the available quota is only 10 metric tons, then that doesn't pass the test for reasonability. And so we would be cautious on things like that. And on top of that, Bill, the stock and the quotas, those are all things that are regulated by the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So it doesn't necessarily play into our licensing, but I get the sentiment behind your question, worried about not enough supply to match up with what buying and processing might be demanded here. But again, I think the ins and outs of the business plan that we're going to require will answer a lot of those questions. And again, if a proposal doesn't pass the reasonability test, then it won't move forward.
And you're right. I was worried about the fish stocks and the supply and
Yeah.
demand situation. And if the supply is really not going to change a whole lot, the addition of more processors and more buyers, will that perhaps drive up the price to the fishers and be a boon to the fishermen themselves?
Well, there's that possibility. I mean, it is economics and supply and demand. So you will have a more competitive market of buyers that could in turn lead to someone paying a little bit more than someone else, which could be a benefit to the harvesters. But again, the idea behind this bill is not to put our good companies out of business that have been around for a long time. The idea is to allow companies to be flexible. So if for example, there's been a fish stock that has been the stock has been low for the last 20 years, and all of a sudden DFO announces an extra X number of a million pounds of quota, then we want people to be able to buy that and process it in a way that they can sell it to a new market.
Right now, I think the number is 20,000 jobs are supported through the fishery in Nova Scotia. Will this increase through the lifting of the moratorium?
That's hard to say. I mean, hopefully that would be the goal, but I know when it comes to the processing side of our industry, a lot of automation is taking place, and there are pressures on the labor force. So when I visit processing plants, one of the conversations that the owners and managers share with me is oftentimes is that there's the trouble with finding adequate workforce. So that's something that again will be a part and parcel of the business plan to make sure that there's not undue competition in terms of stealing human capital from one business in support of a new business.
And of course, we have fishers and processors right across the province, but I understand that about 50% of what really is taking place in the fishery is in southwest Nova Scotia. So this should be a boon to them, certainly.
I would hope so. I would hope so. And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, Bill, but this is about economic development for the entire province. We have a responsibility as a department and me as minister for the orderly development of the sector. And I truly believe that in the light of the tariffs and the worry about where our product is going, that there's big opportunities that we may have been missing out on because of the moratorium. And I think lifting it is really going to help new companies adapt and be innovative and hopefully find new markets.
And of course, Nova Scotia is famous for export of fishery, and the lobster fishery stands out as a highlight for sure. But people may not realize how important it is. Am I correct that the total of our exports of everything we export, fishery still accounts for 36% of that?
You are absolutely correct. So 2 years ago, it was $2.5 billion worth of seafood exports. Last year, it was $2.4 billion in seafood exports. Again, about 20,000 Nova Scotians employed, 36% of our total exports. It is our number one export by almost double. So Michelin tires would be number two at about 1.2, $1.3 billion. So it is incredibly important to the economic stability of our province that our fisheries succeed and thrive.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago about the tariffs and the impact on our exports to the US and being a critical factor. In terms of looking at that, is this move and somehow put you in a position to reach out to new markets in Europe or other parts of the world to try and make up for what we may lose going to the US?
I think that's a fair statement. So luckily the US tariffs, we've avoided those because everything seafood is CUSMA compliant, the Canada, US, Mexico agreement compliant. So that's great on that front. The Chinese demand, what I'm hearing, it's down a little bit on account of the tariffs. But my department, Bill, we do trade missions every year, and the department has been doing trade missions for I think they've told me 10, 12, 15 years or so. And it's always been important for us to diversify markets. Now, that has ended up with 50% going to the US and about 25% going to China. So now the worry and the highlight is certainly even that much more magnified on market diversification. And so we did a trade mission to Europe at the beginning of February. We did three countries, Italy, France, and United Kingdom. Very successful, very good feedback is what I've heard from the companies that joined us on those missions. And then we just returned from the Barcelona Seafood Expo. So the world's largest seafood expo takes place in Barcelona. The premier and I were there for the duration of the event. And we get surveys back from our companies that gives us an idea of how successful it was for them. And we're talking like number of deals and amount of product and amount of revenue. And we don't have that information compiled yet because we just came home on Saturday. But I know that in my conversations with the companies that were there, it was a very, very successful show and a lot of interest in Nova Scotian products going to the European Union.
As you mentioned, we've always attended these fisheries expos and so on. Nova Scotia is famous for its exports for the quality of the fish as well. And I get a kick out of the fact that the premier's taking part. I think he was at a big international expo in Houston, Texas, if I remember, not long ago. And as you pointed out, in Spain recently. And the thought of the premier being the fish salesman for Nova Scotia, I get a chuckle out of that. But it just shows you, as you pointed out, 36% of our exports are fishery. So why not have the premier number one salesman, if you will, along with you on these events?
Well, let's call them one and one A for he and I both. No,
Yeah,
I listen, I will tell you, Bill, the companies that are at these events. So in Barcelona, there were 22 Nova Scotian companies there, and to a company, they just are so thankful and appreciative that the premier takes the time to be there in support of them and have meetings with me with potential new businesses coming to our province. So it is impactful, and it is great that the premier sees how valuable the industry is to the province. And I know we've talked a lot about natural resource development, but the boss has been pretty clear. We're not going to do anything that's going to be detrimental to something that's already providing an economic driver to our province. So I'm just really glad that he's shown the support that he is, and so is industry.
well, but you made the point. It's the industry, the Nova Scotia companies who appreciate the boss, as you called him,
Yeah.
taking the time to be there. But what's the impact with the buyers at the other end? What do other countries in the world think about our premier being at such an event?
It adds a lot of credibility to our mission. So it's not just a group of companies that are coming over to try and peddle their wares. The leader of their provincial government recognizes the value to the province. And when we have meetings over there, it is impactful for the companies. We had a great meeting with a shell waste company that is interested in doing some recycling of shell waste, and they're operating in another country. And our premier took the time to meet with them and talk about the possibilities of them coming to Nova Scotia, and they were incredibly thankful. And it's incredibly impactful to have the premier involved in those meetings.
And I've heard a number of times, and as you probably know, the premier's a regular guest on this program once a month and
Yes.
has been for over 5 years. It's remarkable when I think about it. But he has often used the phrase, Nova Scotia is open for business. And when it comes to your department, that's true in spades.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Again, as I said on Tuesday during the press conference, it's not going to be a free for all, but we're going to accept applications starting in August, and we're going to evaluate these and looking at them through the lens of what's best for Nova Scotia and what's the best economic value for our province. So, not every application is going to be accepted, that's for sure, but the ones that have the best opportunities and the best value for the province certainly will be.
Now, you made the point that they might be looking for a license for a new species to catch and process and so on. I meant to ask and I didn't, so I'll do it now. Getting a new license as a processor, does that necessarily mean we might be looking for new plants, new fish plants and so on? Or is it just expansion of what already exists?
It could be either, Bill. If it's a new company that's coming in, one of the requirements that has always been a part of the conditions for licensing is you have to have a facility or have to prove that you're renting space in a facility. So if you're holding lobster or if you're processing snow crab, you have to have a plant and you have to be a Nova Scotia registered company. So if it's a new player in the game trying to join our industry, they will have to have a pound a processing facility or show that they're renting a space that they're going to do their work in.
Kent Smith, Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Nova Scotia is open for business, sir.
We are. We're going to export our delicious seafood to the world.